Well, I'd like to welcome everyone here today. It's a delight to have this opportunity of presenting. I'm going to do it as in a very informal fashion, because I really want to invoke not only your own personal reflections on the topics that I'm going to raise, but also it's an opportunity to open out to our own understanding of our notion of meditation in particular, what we think meditation can do and what it might achieve both on and off the cushion. So it's really about applicability. And so we'll just spend a moment before the session just reflecting inwards, becoming aware of the state of our mind. Then for a few in and out breaths, let go any tensions, problems, both physical and mental, with the out breath in the form of smoke which tumbles away and dissolves, leaving not a trace. Then with the in-breath, radiant light pours in. This is the essence of enlightened energy, pure enlightened energy. And as it floods through the body and the mind, just as might nectar fill a container to overflowing, feel that this radiant light brings about a great sense of stability, peace, and gentleness in our mind, and deeply, deeply relaxes our body. So in this way, we can pursue the visualization with the breath just gently on our own for a few moments. As the process continues, it deepens. So we let go of even deeply stored tensions in our body and mind, and feel that the radiant, enlightened energy reaches and touches and dissolves even the most subtle problems stored away somewhere in our mind or our bodies. Now we establish the motivation for the session that we're going to share together. Just feeling how precious is this moment of quiet to reflect upon the nature of our lives, our experience, and also the direction of our experience. Are we in control of our lives in a healthy, flexible, even creative manner? So because we do have incredible freedom compared to many beings in many other perilous situations, even in the world around us, such as those in the Ukraine and so forth, undergoing terrible suffering, feel that we're going to use this precious time to draw upon the deepest, most positive aspects of ourselves and bring them into our daily lives. So make this resolve that we're going to do this on behalf, not of ourselves, just one person, but all others who are more vast than the reaches of this country, this world, and so forth. Just expand outwards, leaving not a single being excluded from our concern for their welfare. So this altruistic motivation is a truly extraordinary one, because everything falls into place around it. It's a source of refuge, in other words. We can take absolute safety in this particular space. Also, when driven by the altruistic attitude, there is no way in which we can become a harmful tool or weapon, injuring or disturbing the lives of others. So in other words, we become responsible through generating this altruistic mind in a universal fashion. So feel some joy, delight that we have this moment to generate such a thought. So rare to find. And with that, we conclude the motivation, and I'll open up the topic, which is really an extended meditation in its own right, but I'm not going to conduct it as that, because I'm going to invite us to take away the key ideas of the presentation and maybe navigate in our own time and space. So one of my experiences as a meditation is, if you expect to get a kind of an instant gratification, an instant technique, an instant solution, you'll manage to think you're achieving that with incredible enthusiasm for a few days or a few weeks, and then your own problems will seep back into the picture, and maybe even more apparently savagely so, because you've been trying to think the opposite for a while and think, oh no, here we go again. And so a despair or even a despondency can set in, and unfortunately that despondency can lead to us abandoning our fledgling meditation practice. And so I use the word fledgling deliberately because it's unbelievably delicate, this first moment of learning to meditate. So we must be patient with ourselves, generous with ourselves, and deeply understanding, deeply compassionate, because we're, as we're going to see in the presentation today, we're motivated all the time by these sorts of automatic responses that are so powerful, we get dragged behind them like a piece of flotsam tied by a rope to a ship without a rudder, as it turns out. In this case, we become victims of our own uncontrolled thoughts. And so this meditation today is going to set out a framework for a meditation which we can do repeatedly. So although we're going to learn a technique, and it may be even one that you're familiar with already, this doesn't mean that you've done it. Oh, I've done that meditation. What's next? Because that kind of mentality is part of the problem I forecast in the beginning. If we're thinking like that, then we're not really committed to a deep internal transformation of ourselves. And that's what we're looking at achieving here. And so we need to put that aside humorously, because it is kind of ridiculous that we think we can do that, because it's taken us so long, hasn't it, to build up our problems and our habits, that particularly our destructive habits, that we can't expect just to click them off in a flash. And so I'm going to quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because it's always so inspirational, of course, to quote His Holiness, who is the exemplar of these ideas. His Holiness says, "I believe that for a Buddhist, the essential reason for a practice such as transforming our problems is that there are two ways to avoid suffering and pain. The first, we have to be relating this to ourselves, by the way, the first is to forget and try to bypass negative things and strive not to think about them." So if we just stop to think for a second, and we haven't even got onto the topic yet, but how real, how true is that? How much energy in our lives goes into not thinking what we're thinking, because it's painful or difficult or alerts us to a problem we haven't really dealt with or tackled or transformed. And so this is part of the problem already that we're avoiding. And we're not just avoiding because we see it on the horizon, we sense the enormity of a problem and we begin to maneuver way before we get to it. You know, it's on the horizon, this problem. We know it's a problem. We know we're going to revisit it, but we don't do anything about it until it's precipitated in its gigantic form again. Here, oh no, I'm in the middle of it again. I'm out of control with anger, for example. You know, I know I've got a problem, but here I am, I said something to that person. I wince with pain to reflect on what I just said to my best friend out of a moment of jealousy or whatever, mean-minded spite and so forth. And so this is what His Holiness is saying, not to delay, to actually have the courage, and he's talking about courage here, to look at it, face it. We're talking about facing our problems directly. But His Holiness says that we must also acknowledge that not thinking about the problem, and I quote, is an insufficient method and yields only temporary and transient results because the problem remains intact. So this is the key sort of concept from a Buddhist perspective, because we don't just need to recognize the problem and face it, but we need to work out how to undo it from its very core, from its very base. And so this idea of sort of deconstructing, dismantling problems so that they can't get up and running again is actually an extraordinary series of techniques, because it involves analyzing our experience. And so the meditations involved in this kind of deep probing analysis to get to the root of our problem are referred to in Buddhism as analytical meditations. And I'm sure you're aware of this term, but if you're not, it's actually a crucial idea to begin to grasp, because an analytical meditation is utilizing quite deliberately the conceptual capacity of our mind. So we're not blocking our thought process in an analytical meditation, we're inviting it to lead us through a series of reflections and contemplations that get closer and closer and closer to the deepest base of our problems. And even when they arrive there, we then import various techniques to work and dissolve those problems from their base. And so there's no limit, if you like, to this therapeutic journey that we can undergo through the incredible capacity we have to analyze. And so from a broader Buddhist framework, we say that this human situation is uniquely placed to do this kind of analytical meditation, because we suffer enough to know we've got a problem, but we don't suffer so much that we're unable to do anything effectively at all because we're in so much turmoil and pain. So we have this kind of middle pathway there, which we take for granted. We assume that we're going to have it tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and therefore I don't need to meditate today. So if any of us have suffered from a mental or a physical problem, illness, we'll know that this is very, very, very true. When we're in the middle of those scenarios, that's not the time to learn to meditate. The time to learn to meditate now, and the time to investigate analytical meditation is now. So His Holiness says the other method of avoiding suffering, so avoidance is the first, consists in penetrating inside it, going to the heart of the problem itself and analyzing it. In the beginning, the pain or the problem generally seem immense, a real mountain of woe. Yet, once we have begun to reflect on it, seek out its origin, then analyze and study its nature, its intensity or gravity crumbles. The phenomenon dwindles away. So that is the way one attempts to overcome the obstacle and untangle the problem. So this quote is on page 155 of The Art of Happiness, if anyone's wanting to sort of follow it up again. So His Holiness also says, and this is very pertinent to the question about when to start to meditate, he says that we must start working from where we currently are. He says, if we're wounded by a poisoned arrow, what matters is to pull it out. That is not the moment to wonder where it came from or who shot it or what kind of poison it carries. First, you must solve the immediate problem. Then afterwards, you can study it from every angle. So in other words, we have to strategize as well here and be very, very sensible about our approach. So if we're about to attack someone, for example, out of anger, that is the moment that the poisoned arrow is about to strike its target, according to His Holiness's very potent analogy. And that's when we pull back that wave of anger that's going to lead to a potentially disastrous result. But that isn't enough. Later on, when the moment or the situation affords itself, and hopefully it's going to be that hour or that day, not weeks away, we sit down and we work on that scenario that occurred with great honesty, great integrity, and actually observe how that mind of anger, in this case, or resentment arose, how it targeted a particular person, and how, if we had carried it out, disastrous consequences would have arisen. And because we're not in the heat of the moment, which is the point of this second example, we have some scope, don't we, to actually move around and, as His Holiness says, approach it from every angle. And we have this creative flexibility in analytical meditation. And so I just want to point out here that the mind that meditates analytically, is of course us generally. But when we begin to explore analytical meditation, we'll find that we can very quickly move in and observe an object from an objective, reasonable stance that isn't exactly the same as our usual emotionally strangled, deluded stance of a situation. And so, in other words, we have a clarity in analytical meditation which exceeds the usual worldly daily clarity we have, because we get so jumbled up, don't we, with all of our problems and our afflictive emotions. And so this is one of the great advantages of analytical meditation, because we can then swing that or incorporate that increased clarity of perception, analytical insight that we've gained in meditation, and apply it to arising situations as they occur. And because we're bringing that extra degree of clarity, of precision, if you like, we're not able to succumb in the same way to the powerful impulses and drives of the destructive emotions. Not all emotions are destructive here. We're not anti-emotional. When we use the word sort of analytical, we're not to collapse that into somehow intellectual and dry and abstract and theoretical. It's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about the ability to unwrap something through investigation. And this kind of exploration is actually very, very exciting, very, very interesting, and very, very important. So the meditation just to give an example of an analytical meditation, I'm just going to set up a very short one here. And it's one that we find again in The Art of Happiness on page 129. And this meditation invites us to meditate on someone who is acutely suffering. And we can go a long way, further afield, if you like, to find someone who's going to fit into this classification. But it's probably more powerful to find or select someone who's very, very close to you, who you know for whatever reason is in real trouble. And I'm going to ask you to visualize them in the space in front. So already this meditation is doing exactly what His Holiness described in the beginning, isn't it? It's leading us to look at what we might normally wish to avoid. So I'll just spend a moment setting up that visualization. And it's much more effective if it's a real person, not just people who have problems in general, such as hunger, for example, which of course does affect many millions of people. But it's more powerful to select one particular person. Just bring the visualization to life, making it as real as we can imagine. The person is actually here. And now acknowledge the intense suffering and the unfortunate circumstances of this person at the moment. So just fully open out to an awareness of what they're going through. We can actually pick particular situations or events. So if a person had been diagnosed with a terminal illness unexpectedly, how are they feeling upon hearing that news? So now we move on to the next phase of the meditation. In just a few moments, try to relate to yourself, thinking that individual who I'm visualizing has the same capacity for experiencing pain, joy, happiness, and suffering as do I. And because of this, allow a strong feeling of compassion towards this person to arise. Thinking strongly how wonderful it would be to be able to relieve them of their suffering. And make a resolve that will help this person, directly help them to be free of that suffering. And just let this resolve sit for a few moments to consolidate it while continuing to visualize. And with that, we conclude the meditation. I seem to have some sort of building going on outside. I don't know if it's disturbing the sound too much. There's quite a loud something going on. So we're now going to move on to that's a sample of a very simple analytical meditation, but already you can begin to see how it becomes a direct technique for navigating lived experience. So that's the key here. And also the resolve that we make in the meditation will, and I guarantee this, will affect positively the way we negotiate our relations with that person in an ongoing fashion. So if, for example, we found our compassionate thought of wishing to help them waning, that's the time to do the meditation again, because we forget other people are in trouble. That's the whole issue here. We only care, actually, and this is what our topic's about today, which is equanimity. Unfortunately, with this habitual kind of obsessive mind concerned with me, we only care about those people who serve us. Serve is a good word here. And we forget, literally forget, a whole immense swathe of other beings who simply don't register on that radar of immediate self-concern. And so to follow His Holiness' instructions to look more deeply into our problems, this is a massive problem, because not only does it mean that we can't respond appropriately to this large, important mass of beings, of people, but we can't even look after our own care and needs skillfully, because we're allowing the domination of very narrow thought processes. So I'm going to quote from Nagarjuna, who says, "I and all sentient beings are equal with regard to happiness and suffering. Being equal with regards to happiness and suffering, we are family. It is not right to completely abandon these beings, yet enter nirvana." So the great challenge for us here, and particularly from a Buddhist perspective, is that if there is a technique for overcoming suffering and to generate enormous spontaneous happiness, then wouldn't it be mean and miserable for us to make a dash for freedom on our own? But in a real way, this is what we do. And I'm using the I here as a social collective. You know, sometimes you suddenly get a report in the newspaper about the slave labor producing my T-shirt in Vietnam for a multinational clothing company marketing out of Geneva and selling through high-end fashion shops in Chapel Street here down the road, where people spend $300 on a designer T-shirt that someone's received less than a mouthful of food for. Who made it? This is an example of the kind of embedded way in which this failure of impartiality, this failure of equanimity operates to petition and cordon off vast numbers of beings from our concern. And this is why it becomes an emotional impairment for ourselves, because we're actually crippling our own capacity to grow in seeking to hold on to those attachments to the exclusion of others. And so the classic example of this is families, and we love our families. They're the basis of our best practice, our best selves. But if we cling to our family's happiness to the exclusion of other families, then we have a problem, don't we? And so what this meditation is going to ask us to do, friend, enemy, and stranger meditation, is to place ourselves into the enemy at some point of the meditation and stranger categories and see what happens to our self-cherishing attitude in those moments. Because I care for myself so much that I get really cross and upset if you don't care about me at all. But meanwhile, I'm capable of not caring about you at all because I care for me. thanks very much. Frankly, I don't care what you say, I'm not interested. And so there's this sort of weird inversion. So if I can place myself in your shoes in meditation, even for just a moment of objective analytical meditation, it suddenly strikes me as appallingly unjust that you don't care about me, because, hey, I'm really important. We know that, but you're choosing to ignore me. Who are you? That actually becomes the basis of getting angry with them or even killing them, unfortunately. And so that's insane thinking, because we, as His Holiness said there, are exactly the same in wishing to have happiness and not to suffer. And so the kind of compassion that Buddhism is inviting us to generate is an immense compassion. It's a great compassion. It's not one that's going to be swayed by the immediate vicissitudes of part judgments and fragmented points of view based on a perception of the inequality of the worth of self and others. And so these are great and very important things. This technique of friend, enemy, and stranger meditation is taught at the very beginning of the Bodhisattva's path. And the Bodhisattva is someone who's decided through the force of compassion to work for the benefit of others. We can't even put a step on that path, effectively, if we haven't done our analytical meditation on friend, enemy, and stranger. And the reason for that is we won't have a universal regard to work with. We're only going to work for the freedom or the benefit of a handful. And the cruel fact is that that handful that I choose to work with from my customary habitual self is itself not stable. I think we've all seen Clueless, haven't we? That wonderful American comedy, school comedy. I love that film from a Buddhist way, not only because of the fantastic performances and memorable performances, weren't they? But also the velocity, the ferocious cannibalistic velocity with which those young adult women, those sort of girls, cut through swathes of people to get to their real friends and eliminated everyone else in the path. They were brutal in that pursuit. And it was relentless, that churning. People, you're either in or you're out. Oh, you're in. I love you. You're out. I hate you. You're not even worth talking to. I don't care. The friend, enemy, and stranger is palpably writ in that very, very simple common scenario. And these are the very scenarios, of course, that are being acted out in social media. I'm not going to go into detail there, but I think there's a case to be made for even more dangers now, because as we become more dissociated from the objects of our concern through media displacement, we feel that we can say things to her that are more intense and more dreadful than something we could say to our neighbor, because we see the impact of those words when they strike our neighbor. She cries. She can't even form a word in reply. She's so wounded. But we can say something much more savage in a Twitter or an Instagram sort of comment. And so young people are reporting this, that the cruelty that's out there in the social universe, media universe, is brutal. It's clueless writ large. So we need to be responsible for not participating in that kind of thoughtless attack, really. So His Holiness says, in every meeting, I keep in mind, this is His Holiness talking about himself, in every meeting I keep in mind that we are all alike, in that both you and I are human beings. To underline the superficial differences, I am an Oriental and furthermore a Tibetan from beyond the Himalayas, born into a different culture and environment. Yet, looking closer, I have the feeling of being myself, and with this feeling, I seek happiness and seek to reject suffering. Anybody, no matter where they come from, has the same feeling of myself at the conventional level, and in that regard, we're all alike. Granted that as a starting point, when I meet new people in new places, there is no barrier or curtain drawn across my mind. How remarkable was that image? No barrier, no curtain drawn across my mind. I can converse with you as I do with old friends, even if it is a first meeting. In my mind, as human beings, you are my brothers and sisters, and in substance, that makes no distinction. I can express what I feel without hesitation, as before old friends. Thus, we can communicate without difficulty and establish a link, not just through an exchange of polite commonplaces, but heart to heart. By basing myself on such a human relationship, it is possible to develop mutual trust and respect. So this takes us to the very core, doesn't it, of social harmony, whether that social harmony is with our family or our next door neighbor or our friend, but also with our country, our nation, and our international global situation. The world is in travail in so many ways at the moment, with wars. And why now we have this incredibly sophisticated technology of communication? How come it's been weaponized to cause more harm and more division between people? So we need to step right back and begin to take what's here and work in transforming ourselves. So this technique of friend, enemy, and stranger involves the visualization again. So I'm going to ask us now to visualize a friend. And bring the visualization to life. And as we contemplate the friend, with a small, quiet corner of the mind, investigate what kinds of feelings arise in us as we contemplate our friend. And also contemplate what actions can arise out of these feelings that we have for our friend. Now we gently place that friend to the side, still leaving them there, but no longer as the key point of focus, and visualize in the space in front a stranger. This already invokes certain methodological problems, doesn't it? Because we have difficulty visualizing strangers because we haven't really paid any attention. So my experience of this portion of the meditation is to pick someone whom I might meet daily, but have never really spoken to or engaged, such as someone who might work at a local shop or store, for example. Someone who sells us a ticket as we get on a bus or a train. We might say hi, but we haven't gone beyond that. So fill them in the space in front. Visualize them in as much detail as we can. And again, very quietly with a portion of our analytical mind, identify what kinds of feelings arise as we contemplate this stranger. Now investigate what kinds of actions towards the stranger or the feelings that I have invite me or coax me to do, just as we did with the friend. Now we contrast the friend and the stranger by bringing them both into central focus and just move backwards and forwards for a few moments, continuing to analyze the differences involved, both in our feelings and in our perception of the kinds of actions or social responses that we might make in relation to these two individuals. And now we place both to the side and we visualize an enemy. Sometimes we protest and say we don't have enemies, we're really nice people and we love everyone. So it's sufficient for the purpose of this meditation to pick your least liked person. The one that you might think, oh no, they've attended my dinner party, I didn't want them to come, or my Christmas party or whatever. Or they're at work again, I was hoping I wouldn't see you for another week. You're really difficult to get on with. So again, try to pick an actual person, place them in front, bring them to life. And again, quietly investigate what kinds of feelings are elicited within us as we contemplate this person. And just as we did with the friend and the stranger, analyze what kinds of actions can we perform towards this person whom we're regarding as an enemy or a least liked person. Now bring the three together: friend, stranger, and enemy. And again, as we did with the two, move across the category of three, just comparing. And now, in the last portion of the meditation, just consider that we, the meditator, might conceivably be the friend in someone else's meditation, the stranger in someone else's meditation, even the enemy in someone else's meditation. Yet, we want nothing more than to be happy and to avoid suffering. So just consider now from the perspective of the object being visualized, whom we're now seeing as us in the space of friend, enemy, or stranger, how distorted, how difficult, how blocked, how veiled is the response to us when it's been filtered through the lens of this tripartite regime. It blocks us from being looked after adequately. In the case of the stranger, it invites us to be attacked or abused. In the case of the enemy, and it invites us to be indulged and pampered, but perhaps not really in a reliable, sophisticated manner as a friend. Because the reality is that these three categories, friend, enemy, and stranger, are being shunted backwards and forwards by our own projecting mind. Someone who is a friend today becomes an enemy tomorrow and a stranger the day after. Someone who's a stranger becomes recruited to a friend, normally because they've done some little gesture, often very, very insignificant. Even smiled or said hello is enough. And someone can become an enemy by inadvertently saying something that we've taken deep offense to. And so our view of others is this constant juggling act, trying to keep these three categories on the go continuously, with the population constantly shuffling. So even if we're being constantly shuffled in someone else's meditation, in the sense that we're their friend one minute, their stranger the next, even their enemy the next, we know that deep down we wish to have happiness and not to suffer. This is our fundamental right, our natural right. So it follows logically through the power of this analysis of friend, enemy, and stranger that we should dissolve the categories, let them go, and in their space, with a deep, compassionate, affectionate mind, embrace all beings as precious, with the immediacy, the candor, the openness and trust that His Holiness the Dalai Lama described in his relationships when he meets new people as his dearest friends. This is the model. We're not trying to get rid of friends per se. We're trying to get rid of a constipated friendship as part of that three-part structure and generate an impartial compassion that is able to embrace each and every being upon contact with them and see them affectionately, spontaneously. So just see if we can generate this feeling of spontaneous affection now, equally to the three people we visualized in our meditation today. Using our best practice in relation to the friend and seeing if we can spread it at least across to the stranger and the enemy. And then exponentially work outwards to include each and every being in limitless space. So with that, we conclude the meditation. And I've actually, I've cut the meditation short. The techniques in analytical meditation are often quite vast and quite rich, and sometimes apparently very complicated. So as I said before, it's not a matter that you just do the meditation once, think I've done friend, enemy, stranger, what's next? Because that shows that there's been no application to actual experience. And so my model for this meditation is to use daily events as the gist for the meditation, even on the run. And so what I mean by that is that as we encounter people, witness what goes on in us, and witness, can we actually see their situation? And I think we've all had the experience, haven't we, of not caring for someone enough to notice them, i.e. they're strangers, and then suddenly they say something that hits us with great force, and we realize there's a person there talking from their experience, and it's incredibly real and incredibly important what they're saying. And we look at them for the first time, maybe in years, and actually say, talk to me. I want to hear what you're saying. I want to share with you what your experience is. And we're open to it, this direct transaction, without any of the blinking operations of the friend, enemy, and stranger category tyrannizing our sort of mode of presenting to them. And so my experience of this meditation technique is that it goes way beyond what it appears to be experientially, because if we meditate on the stranger, for example, as a particular person, next time we see that person, we can almost accidentally find ourselves chatting with them as if they're our friend, because we've actually embraced them in a way that we've never allowed ourselves to do before. So of course, this meditation can be opened out to include international warfare and so forth. And so the model is collective as well as personal. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to stop chatting now and open for any comments or thoughts you might have about the technique or anything related to the presentation today.
That was great, Ross. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question. I'm sure you've heard this question a million times. I won't even go into what happened. It doesn't matter. But I had an interaction with a stranger where I felt verbally attacked. And it was it was out of the blue. And it was, and I'm sad to say, my first, and it just happened so quickly that I just went reflexively to, you have no right to say that, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I'm ashamed to say that, but how in those situations is it, how do you take a, like, I felt like it never even occurred to me to take a pause. It was just so unjust and so out of the blue. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fantastic example of a real situation. And I'm going to explore these sorts of themes over the coming weeks, because they're obviously deserving of a great deal of sort of care in investigating them. I'm just thinking of, my immediate thought was, Shanti Deva in Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life says that in those moments, and this is a pretty stunning advice, he says, pretend to be a lump of wood.
Yeah.
And what he's saying is simply shut down on the spot, because you're not reliable, you're not guaranteed to be able to do anything better. And if you do anything at all, it's going to be disastrous. So just simply don't act. And so this shutting down is instant. Simply become a block of wood. So you don't even have to have a facial expression. Because, you sort of think, you glare at the person and then you get another volley, and before you know it, they're attacking you, for example. So it's not to say there isn't a real threat and that you haven't been abused. That could well be the case. But what is the most skillful way of handling that situation? And so shutting down, in that sense that I've just described, is a holding pattern. It's not the be-all and end-all of solutions, but it's the best immediate solution. And then make a decision. And my suggestion might be to walk away. Simply say, look, if they're a stranger, you don't have to explain why you're walking away, do you? You can simply walk away. Or you can say, excuse me, I don't know what to say, and walk away. But the deeper answer to that, from a Buddhist perspective, is to recognize that that moment of the person's actions are being driven by a deluded mind, and they are themselves a victim of that. And so Buddhist compassion embraces the fact that other beings are flawed, not FLOORED, although it might be if the anger's there, but they're not perfect, and neither are we. And I was quoting on my chat yesterday, Geshe Doga, my teacher, said, why should we expect to have an enlightened partner when we're not enlightened yet? Like, we have this incredible expectation of what others must be doing for us. And when they fail, the consequences are grievous, aren't they? But that's all a reflection of our self-cherishing, our self-grasping. And so at least feel that although what they're saying or doing at that moment is unbearable and hard to be there with, which is true, deeper down, you don't abandon that person. And this idea of non-abandonment is absolutely crucial in Buddhism, because as we did in that meditation, we can be that person with just a moment's flare-up. How many people are in jail, even for life, for crimes of so-called passion, that were the result of a feeling that might only lasted for half a minute? And in that moment, they picked up something in the kitchen and struck their partner and killed them. These are dreadful examples, but it shows you the power of the uncontrolled mind. And so Buddhism is asking us to not wait until we're in that predicament ourselves, but to begin to work on not generating even beginnings of those kinds of destructive minds. And so I had a quote at the end of my talk, which I haven't got to, which is very, very beautiful. His Holiness says, since all these beings are the cause of the factors of awakening, therefore, all who wish for complete awakening should regard sentient beings as gurus, as teachers. And so Buddhism takes that example that you've described and says, this is an incredibly precious moment for you as a meditator, because it measures the degree to which your compassion and concern for that person can be injured or kicked out of place by just a few words or a simple act. That is a sign that you are yet to generate great compassion. So you go back to your cushion, you sit down again. And so that person is like a manifestation of the Buddha saying you've got work to do. And so they're actually very precious. And I know Lama Zopa Rinpoche talks about this all the time, how incredibly precious these enemies are, because they're giving us the mechanism to delimit our own process, our own growth. And so there's a lot of things going on here at once. And it's not to say that we have to stay in that situation and endure it in the name of Buddhism at all. It's saying that we have to be skillful in how we respond. And so Shantideva's idea of shutting down like a plank of wood is a tactic, a very, very beneficial tactic. And I think it's similar to the one that parents use, don't they, with children when they're throwing a tantrum and they say, time out. We have to give ourselves some time out and go to the quiet room and just sit for a little bit.
With that situation, my first reaction was not good at all. But but it was better than it might have been a year ago or 5 years ago. And I quickly realized that she was probably a frightened old lady is what had happened. And I was able to develop compassion after I sniped back at her. I would have been much better being, a lump of wood or a block of wood. But I was able to develop compassion, and that might be me, in that same situation. And so, anyway, I'm going to keep that in mind, the block of wood, and just that would help me very much in life, just because I'm fight is my nature. And so I instantly forget. Just
Shanti Davis says, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in other weeks, but pretend to be a block of wood. But he also says to blame the delusion and not the person. And this is a really crucial one. And I think for me, the model of that is, we had a terrible example of this in Australia, where a young Vietnamese man was caught in Thai customs bringing heroin into Australia. And unfortunately, he did it at the bequest of his brother, who was a resident here, who didn't get caught. And the boy who'd been arrested, young man, was actually sentenced to death because carrying a large haul of drugs through that airport is dangerous indeed. And the tragic part of the story was his mother went to the city where he was going to be hung, Bangkok, and stood outside the gate, because she wasn't allowed inside the jail, and watched the clock. Isn't that extraordinary for a mother to have to go through that? And so for me, that resonated. I mean, it resonates in so many powerful ways, but a mother's love is taken in Buddhism as the sort of ordinary example of the best practice that we can muster without additional training, because it's unmitigated by the kind of superficial concerns that result in the abandonment of a person. So that mother might have thought, why did my boy do that act? What a dreadful thing to do, to carry drugs, etc. That she might have had those views, but at no point did that impinge on the fact that she wanted nothing more than to hug that boy and to, I was going to say, reabsorb her into her body, because she had given birth. That was her wish, and she couldn't, because the system had him and it was out of her control. So Buddhism asks us to try to work with these situations when people are not in our control, but we can contact them, we can contact ourselves. So I just give that as a little example. Yeah. And the fact that people could not think about that situation, or dealing drugs, you get what you deserve kind of thought. How thoughtful is that? How considerate is that kind of thinking? If you did friend, enemy, and stranger meditation, you'd be forced to realize that that boy was firstly a young person. They hadn't had a lot of life experience. He was in a refugee migrant community in Australia, where often economic and social and housing problems can be exacerbated. And he's also trying to please his brother, who might have been part of a gang and be putting certain pressures on him to act on his brother's behalf. And how did the brother feel when his own brother was executed? Like, how amazing is that? And so Buddhism says to wish to put yourself in the other's place. And so there are beautiful examples of this at the time of I'm going over time a little bit, is that all right? A few minutes? Of when the Chinese invaded Tibet, some of the high meditators, the very advanced yogic meditators, sat down in meditation and transferred their consciousness into their next life through the power of meditation. And the reason for that was to enable the soldiers not to carry the karma of killing them. It's just a remarkable story. Rather than let those soldiers carry that heavy burden, they chose to go themselves. They recognized the situation wasn't very positive and they had little choice. They're going to die either way. But they had that capacity, yogic capacity, and they used it. And so this is an example of incredible wisdom combined with compassion. And that's really our aim. It's not something we have easily, but we work towards it. Yeah. So I might finish there on that note because it seems an appropriate spot, but I'll just ask us to spend a moment in contemplation and to give away any benefits that might have arisen as a result of spending this time together for the welfare of others. Starting with those closest to us and then expanding outwards. And feel that the blessings of the Buddhas pour into us, enabling us to do this, both now and in the future. And with that, we conclude the dedication. I just wanted, just before I leave, I don't think anything I've said today is Buddhist, really, implicitly, is it? It's Buddhism implicitly embraces these sorts of concepts, but these concepts in themselves aren't Buddhist. They're universal concepts, and they have incredible use to each and every person. And so it doesn't matter what faith group or non-faith group or whatever it is that you come from, these analytical meditations are incredibly effective and will definitely work. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I'll think about what to do. Have you got any suggestions for next class? I've got a few ideas, but something you'd like me to tackle? It's throwing you in the deep end, isn't it?
I think just continuing on where we left off,
yeah,
would definitely be helpful for me. Anything that you say is helpful for me.
Yeah. So I'm actually here. I've got more I'd like to say about this meditation, actually, but sort of developing it a little bit more. So, and then stepping on to other topics. So I'd be more than happy to continue from where I left off. Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much. It's been a delight to spend some time together.
Thank you.
And take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. You guys
Thank
have
you,
a great day.
Shayla.
Thank you
For convening. Yeah.